does he do? He might go all the way. He gives it a ride. It's a chance. It'll be a goal. Wants to be rolling through. He can. Cometh the moment. Cometh the champion.
This is the Swans Blog's SwansCast, the number one listened to Sydney Swans fans podcast.
And here they go again, the Dogs. They are peppering away.
Dunkley's free on his own inside 50.
Bontempelli sees that. Oh, he's dropped it. He just can't find a goal, even when it's put on a platter.
In this week's episode, we will be reviewing the thrilling 7-point round 4 win against the Western Bulldogs on Saturday afternoon, as well as Florent's winning goal and Dunkley's drop mark at the end of the game. We'll wrap up the weekend of football that was, and we'll look ahead to round 5, previewing the Swans clash against the Adelaide Crows at the SCG. This is your host, Justin Mitchell, and with me in this week's episode is Heather Quinlan, former Sydney Morning Herald journalist. Heather, how are you?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Really great. Looking forward to another good show tonight. I really enjoy being on the Swans Blog podcast when I'm invited on. It's really excellent to participate and be able to share a few thoughts on my favourite topic, the Sydney Swans.
Oh, look, Heather, it is always great to have you on, and nothing better than to talk about the Swans. Now, that was a tremendous victory on the weekend. Would you say so yourself?
I don't need to use any more stop and grow on my fingernails because I chewed the nails off at various stages during the game, in particular in the last few minutes of the match. But look, a really great outcome. I'm glad that the Swans prevailed there, because I would have been very disappointed if they hadn't. They did a lot of work, I think, to overcome the Bulldogs' lead that they had. But I think it'd be fair to say that there were times in the first half where I don't think either the players or the coaches would have been that happy. But let's face it, it is only round 4.
Oh, it's only round 4, and these are the sort of performances you want to have at the start of the year when you're still really, I guess, the players are learning the game plan, the coaches are still learning the game plan and where the players fit in and whatnot. I thought Aaliyah was probably a really good example of that. He's a player who, as a junior, played a lot of football as a rock forward, but as a senior, he's played almost entirely defence. And as John Longmire said in his press conference today, but also on Saturday night, was the fact that he has played a little bit in reserves, but he hasn't played there consistently, and he hasn't had like a long stretch of play there. So these kind of performances, round 4, you're absolutely right. We just need to keep that in mind. I think there's probably a little bit too much, perhaps, overreaction. Would you agree with that, Heather?
I think so, in that, from what I've seen, for example, on social media, people have been a little bit critical of Aaliyah, and I think that you've got to understand that the man has not played a lot of senior football in the last 12 months. He's still a developing player.
It was actually his first game for a year.
Well, there you go. First game for a whole year in the seniors. He's still a developing player. He hasn't played a lot of forward recently, and he did look a bit lost at times, and you know what? Things can only improve from here because Aaliyah has a lot of talent. We just need to see more of it come out, and I think probably, there's going to be games where you can't afford to have somebody just, still learning. They need to be able to just perform on the day, but having said that, you've got to balance that with just getting them out there and giving them the minutes on the park. So, I think there's probably been a little bit of overreaction there about him and maybe a couple of other players too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Certainly, if you look back in 2016, his performances in defence, he was excellent, he was bombastic, he ran off defence, and his intercept marking along with Mills and Rampy was out of this world. He played, I believe, about 8 or 9 games, and the Fox Footy panel, especially led by David King, they were saying he was elite. He was basically an elite level player despite the fact he hadn't even played 10 games. So I think that's something that as fans we need to keep in mind with that. He's playing something different. He's still quite, young and inexperienced as far as football goes. So there's still a lot of development to go there. But Heather, let's get kicking on into heroes and villains of the week. Now, I believe you have a hero of the week.
Yeah, so my hero for the week is going to be a popular one, I think. It was young Ollie Florent. Now, Ollie is a wonderful young player. We've enjoyed watching him debut. And on Saturday night, he really provided a wonderful, exciting finish to really what ended up being a bit of sort of an exciting end to the game. What he did was, I'm assuming everybody saw it, but let's recap. He marked the ball. He marked the ball on the wing. He was chased by Tim English. Florent decided to take off, and Tim English, the Bulldogs' young ruckman, I think he's played 4 or 5 games.
Yep.
Took off after him. Now, English isn't your typical ruckman. He's not a lumbering Queen Mary type. He's actually got a bit of pace. He actually put Florent under quite a lot of pressure. Florent bounced the ball once. Then he decided it really wasn't safe for him to bounce again. So he just steadied and took a shot for goal from about 45 metres out, rolled it through, never looked like missing. The crowd, well, at least the Swans part of the crowd, went berserk.
Yes, they did.
And it sealed the game, with a 7-point victory. So theoretically, had he missed that,
the game was still on.
The game was still on, and the Bulldogs had a chance to win. So for him to be able to do that was a wonderful sight. And I did note that Dan Hanbury, who's seen a fair few things in his time, was very excited to see Florent do that and really just make his mark in a very professional, calm and mature way for a young man.
It was fantastic to watch, it really was. And after the match, when he was interviewed by Swans TV, he said that he looked around, he saw him running, and he said, "Oh, look, he's a pretty good player and very quick. I just had to throw it on the boot, and it luckily rolled through." The best part about that was he said, "I carried on a bit like a pork chop," which I was kind of expecting the double arm, fist pump, the windmill sort of rotating, but it never really happened. But it was fantastic to watch, and it was probably like the best finish to that game that you could possibly have had. And in my opinion, that goal was very Rowan-esque, out the back, like the kind of, you're looking at like the Richmond game from last year, and also the Adelaide game when Papley got one out the back from Franklin's pass from about half-back flank.
Yes.
Very similar. Now, have you got a villain of the week, Heather?
Yes, I do have a villain of the week. And look, my villain of the week is, it's a collective. Unfortunately, it's the umpires from that game. Now, I don't know any of these gentlemen personally, and I'm assuming that the umpires this year, given the absence of logos on the back of the shirts that I saw last week, I'm wondering whether some of the umpires are actually sponsored by the Guide Dog Association.
No longer OPSM.
Yes, yep. Indeed, because the Sydney Swans suffered a 2016 grand final-esque free kick count, which read 29 Bulldogs, 16 Swans. Now, this was quite a close game, as the scoring would attest, and it's quite mystifying to look at that count, 29-16. So you're looking at, almost 50% again. Frees have gone towards the non-winning team.
Yep.
Now, I'd be highly surprised if the Umpires Association and that whole coaching group hadn't gone through those tapes quite carefully today, and potentially on Sunday as well, because that's a considerable disparity, and clearly there were some frees that were given there that were quite mystifying, holding the ball that they weren't. Yep. And a number of other occasions. And look, boo umpires. I'm sorry, you just didn't need to impose yourselves on that game in that fashion. What did you think about that, Justin?
I have to agree. I could kind of understand what some people were saying about in the first 30, 40 minutes, and if you jumped on Twitter, you could see the usual sort of Twitter nonsense. And Twitter isn't exactly the best source of information or commentary, let's just put it that way. But a lot of, neutrals and Bulldog supporters were saying, or at least suggesting, that the Swans were getting the rub of the green. And there was probably a couple of dubious free kicks that the Swans got, or at least, they were 50-50, but they went the Swans' way. But after that, it just went all the Dogs' way. There was the Lin Jong mark that he just dropped, and he got paid a mark for a ball he just clean dropped, and the umpire didn't call play on. And as an umpire, I've been in that situation before, and I have called play on in that situation, or at least stopped playing, done a ball up. So that was the wrong thing to do. Then there was a bunch of other incidents where they've not paid a free kick when the players have dropped the ball or they've been caught holding it. And perhaps the most infuriating one was when McLean got caught high, when he ducked into it by letting his shoulder and lifting his arm. So, yeah, look, the umpiring performance wasn't great. It's another one of those, free kick Bulldogs tags. The hashtag can almost be reinvented or restarted.
Yep. I totally agree, but it didn't materially affect the outcome of the game in this situation, but it has in the past, and it may do in the future. And I just think the umpires just have to just be vigilant in this area. That's all. And enough about the umpires anyway. Let's talk about the actual players. How about you give us your hero?
Yeah, my hero of the week is Old Man McVeigh. So his first half was a bit, it was okay. He wasn't really having much of an influence on the game, but he was doing what he had to do. It really picked up in the fourth quarter when he was involved in everything good that happened in the defence. You still had Rampy intercepting and spoiling constantly. But some of the things that McVeigh did in that last quarter was just, he wound back the clock quite a few years, and he showed that he still can do it at the top level, and he can do it at a very, very high level of quality. Yeah,
I do agree, and it's remarkable in some respects because he is very clearly lost a yard of pace. I think he'd be the first person to say he's the slowest man in the team, but he's very clever, and he's economical, I suppose, in that he picks his targets, and I noticed that he, right there at the end, there was the Bulldogs had the ball right on the boundary and tight in the pocket, and really I can't remember who the player was, but he wheeled around as if to try and kick it back towards the goals, and
smothered on the wing.
McVeigh just found a way to get there, smothered it, so it went over the line. And look, everybody, I started breathing then after about 20 seconds and went from purple back to pink again. So good on you, Macca.
Look, that happened right in front of us on the wing too. So you could imagine that the Swans Bay, they all went up in unison and they all celebrated in style. It was a fantastic thing to watch. And on his disposal, he did have I did the recap video, and the one clanger he had was when he picked out, I think, Caleb Daniel, hit him smack bang on the chest, and I think they got it inside 50 and maybe a goal from that. But that was the only real moment where he had like a missed kick or missed disposal the entire match. I thought he was very solid, very consistent, and very good. Now, I do have a villain, and
excellent. Again,
it's not just an individual, it is unfortunately a team.
Oh.
Yeah, it is the Brisbane Lions. Now, in a week where the AFL has given the MCG the grand final hosting rights till the end of times for at least the next 400 years, for the Brisbane Lions to be my villain is quite significant in my opinion. But they produced one of the worst games of football that I've ever seen from any team ever. They kicked 17 points for an entire match. 17! They were goalless for over 2.5 quarters. And look, they were dreadful. They were 100% dreadful. After 3 really, really good competitive weeks, they just served up dross. It was not good to watch. And it was, in the end, their lowest score for the Brisbane Lions. I don't know about Fitzroy. I'm sure Fitzroy scored lower, but certainly for that club, it was their lowest ever score. It was also one of the lowest scores at the MCG for nearly a century, and it was one of the lowest scores that Richmond's conceded for almost a century. So it was a record-breaking day for Richmond and Brisbane for all the wrong reasons. I
think if I'd gone to that game, I would have been very disappointed. Really, really disappointed.
Yeah.
But it's surprising when you consider that Brisbane the previous week had pushed Port Adelaide to within an inch of its life. So you know that they're capable of more.
Yeah.
It's almost like they spent everything they had the week before.
Yeah, and they were superb against Port Adelaide. And I guess that's a really good point as well, in that maybe they were just mentally, physically spent. But this is round 4 out of 23 rounds. They've still got another 17 games to play. So they can't be calling in the cards and saying I'm out of here and checking out in round 4. That's just that's bad. But we'll do a quick roundup of the AFL later on. There's certainly a lot of games that were very one-sided, but we're going to touch on that a bit later on. But now it's time to talk about our win on the weekend. So the Swans did it in a 7-point thriller over the Western Bulldogs at Etihad Stadium. Now, the Swans, Heather, they hold a very good record at Etihad Stadium. They have won 13 of their last 15 matches, and Western Bulldogs last year were the first team to beat them since St Kilda in 2012. Yeah,
that's a remarkable record, isn't it?
It really is. And would you sort of suggest that perhaps Sydney Swans now own Etihad Stadium?
I reckon they should have their names strung up in lights.
Yep.
on one of the tiers of the stands, because they just seem to play very, very well there. And certainly I've noticed that Franklin enjoys the rarefied air of Etihad Stadium. I think he has produced some pretty good games there. And look, you'd have to say that, you know, when the roof is shut, it's an excellent environment, yet not affected by
any wind or anything like that.
Yeah, wind and other elements. I mean, I was certainly watching a game on the weekend, and I'm thinking now that it was the Hawthorn-Melbourne match where they had very, very strong wind, and I saw one kick for goal that literally boomeranged away from the goal and out of bounds on the full. It was totally weird. So, I mean, I think good goal kickers will benefit from playing there, and I think they like the speed and the size of the ground. So I'm not quite sure what it is, but it'd be nice if the AFL even, you know, sent us off to play there a bit more often.
Yeah, it is a really quick deck, and the Swans have previously said that because it is so quick, it really suits their game style, which is a very fast counter-attacking, get it out the back, attack the wings, and then bring it through the centre, and then attack the pockets. It's from a fan's perspective, I don't think it's the greatest stadium to watch football at. I don't know if you've been to Etihad Stadium before, Heather, have you?
No, I haven't. It's on my to-do list, but no, I haven't. I'm interested in your perspective on that.
Well, it's okay if you're at the ground level because you're close enough to the players, but if you're a little bit higher up, you can get caught out where the stands are because the stands almost hang over the field, so you miss. So if you're up in the clouds looking directly down, you can actually have part of the ground obscured. The other thing is, obviously, the food isn't really that good and it's also very expensive. But one of the best things about it is the public transport connections. But look, enough on that. Etihad certainly suits the Swans. It suits Franklin, and I think the Swans have done very well there in recent times. They are certainly the most winning team at that ground, and even more impressive is they win more games at Etihad than they do at the SCG. Which is also a little bit disappointing because it's not really in Sydney, despite the fact that Sydney's fortress. Alternative fortress, anyway. But probably the best thing that came out of the game was no injuries, Heather.
Yeah, no, very, very pleased to see that, which is good because I think there's sort of enough going on without that. Certainly, we've got Gary Rowan away from the game on and off at the moment, and we've got a couple of others with sort of existing long-term injury concerns. So the good thing is, there were no injuries, and particularly when you have a look at the Swans' opponent coming up this week, Adelaide, who have a wealth of injury problems.
Yes, they do.
That was a very, very, very good outcome from the game.
It really was. We did have Franklin, who looked like he sort of jammed up his shoulder in the second quarter, and I was there at the ground, and all the Swan supporters and fans around me who were kind of freaking out a bit, and I was certainly a bit worried. And I'm thinking to myself, oh no, if he goes injured, that's it, that's our season, because we haven't got any other forwards to come in. We literally have no other forwards. But he just went bang after that. He worked his way back into the game, despite Easton Wood hanging off him like a glove. And then in the third quarter, he just went bang, bang, and tore the game open. What did you think of his game, Heather?
I definitely think that Easton Wood won the battle in the first half. And it was interesting that typically there had been, I've forgotten the rookie's name, but there was a young Bulldogs player who was touted to play on Franklin. But
Aaron Norton?
Aaron Norton, that's right. But needless to say, he didn't really see a lot of the action. It was basically Easton Wood, who's a very experienced and reliable, capable, and quite a canny player. So, and he did a very, very good job on Franklin. But I just think that Franklin wore him down. He just Easton Wood just couldn't keep up with him really in the second half. No, and look, Franklin is great at setting, and he's so underrated at the way he sets up goals for other players. And I've seen him play better, but I think he was still very, very effective, and really he kicked the goal that put the Swans in front in the last quarter, and he really fired up the crowd. And that's one of the magic things that he can do, is that he really inspires his teammates. And how do you put a value on that?
Oh, you can't really. The club certainly has, and I think they've reaped benefits from it. Their $10.3 million over 9 years is more than paid for itself. Certainly only 5 years in. So, Yeah, he is invaluable to the club and I think to the league itself. And watching him get on top of the Bulldogs' defence in the third quarter and kick those 2 goals. And he certainly set Heaney up right before the siren in the second quarter, about 20 seconds left. He just chiseled it into Heaney, and Heaney kicked that goal, which brought us about 10 points closer. So,
yeah.
Down at half-time, 10 points. We are within striking distance, and then the Swans just went bang at the start of the fourth quarter. They kicked the first 4 goals. They got out to about 14 points. And at that point, it was still, like, they were so accurate in front of goal, it was 10-3. Could you believe that we actually kicked 10 goals to 3 behinds?
No, yes, I could from the perspective of the fact there was no wind, but no, I couldn't. That was great accuracy, just tremendous accuracy. And that's helped, can I just say, by a player of Luke Parker's quality,
yes,
having the opportunity to line up for some goals, because he is a good kick for goal under any circumstances and at any ground. But to have him taking some marks and getting some set shots, you can just about set your clock by him, really.
Oh, he is. He is one of the best set shots, certainly as far as midfielders go in the league. There's absolutely no question about that. He's very highly rated internally and externally. He was, in my opinion, the difference in the first half for the Swans. He was making the play. He was certainly kicking goals. He kicked 3 goals in the first half, and it really was pretty much like the Parker and Papley double team that kept the Swans even close, because up until Heaney kicked the goal, they were the only goal kickers.
Yes, they were. And I was just going to mention, totally agree with you. Papley was very, very lively in the second half, less so in the second half, but he does have that tendency, I've noticed, to sort of come into the game and waft out of the game. Potentially that's something that he'll work on and improve on. I do think probably that the Bulldogs put a bit more time into him. In the second half, whereas he was very, very dangerous in the first half. And I agree with between he and Parker, they really, really kept the forward line alive when it was when Franklin was obviously receiving a fair bit of attention from Easton Wood. So. Yeah, that was great to see, and overall, I'm really pleased to see in the points awarded by the coaches for the players that Isaac Heaney received the top votes this week with 8, because in my opinion, he's been the Swans' sort of best player really over the first 4 rounds. He's been the most consistent, not always brilliant or what have you, but in terms of coming up with some really good games, I think he's been quite reliable, and certainly I thought he was unlucky to miss out on the best on ground in the game up against GWS, and I was just pleased to see him being rewarded this week, because he's a really, really hard worker. He takes a great mark, he tackles with heart, he presents, he kicked a goal, and really he was pretty dynamic, I think, for the Swans. And what were your thoughts?
I loved watching him play. I thought it was one of his best career performances, hands down. He was influential pretty much from go to woe. The first minute to the last second, he was in it. Whenever he had the ball, he did something with it. He was always positive. He rarely turned it over. Some of the marks he did were spectacular. He took that nice specky. I think it was that was in the first quarter or the third quarter, I can't remember which one it was, but he took a really good mark in the forward zone, and he was just great throughout. I thought he was important, especially when the game was on the line and it needed to be won. He was there and he was willing to do the hard work to get it. I was very, very impressed with his performance, and I'm glad the coaches' votes gave him 8 in the end, because as far as our votes, I gave him 5 and gave him a 9 rating as well. So he's done pretty well, I think, this season. He's certainly one of the highest averaged rated players that I've done, and the coaches' votes have, I think, reflected that as well. And I think he's going to, at this point in the season, certainly when you're looking at the Bob Skilton medal count, I think he's going to factor quite prominently as well, along with like Sinclair and Franklin.
Yeah. Totally agree. And just want to reiterate, I know you mentioned him very briefly before, but Dane Rampey had started the season slowly, I think it's fair to say, but he appears like he's getting back on track, and he was quite dynamic against the Bulldogs and really did some excellent things. He was reliable in defence. He didn't give anything away. He took some intercept marks, and he started running a little bit, which I think is only a good sign, and I feel like he's still got his best performances ahead of him this season, which is really great to see.
Yeah, he was terrific, I thought, as well. He was pretty much intercepting everything from the first quarter throughout the match. I thought he was critical as well. He spoiled Dixon quite a few times. Although Dixon got the better of him on a few occasions, he still managed to keep with him and do a lot of damage on him. He certainly featured prominently in the votes as well, so he ended up with 3 coaches' votes. And I suspect that that's probably 2 Longmire and 1 from Beveridge. But I thought he was pretty important in that second and third quarter when the Swans are really under pressure and the Dogs are really trying to hit the scoreboard, but he just sort of stood up, he's very resolute, and he just rebounded everything. Very, very impressed with his game, and he's certainly a lot more improved than what he was at the start of the season.
Yeah, and look, just one other observation from me in relation to the Swans from that game, and it is a little bit of a negative one, but I want to temper it. I did notice that, look, one of my favourite emerging players, Nick Newman, really had a bit of a shocker.
Yeah, agreed.
He unfortunately he had a bit of time. He had a game out. He was dropped basically.
He was, yeah.
And he came back in, and unfortunately, a couple of clangers. A couple of occasions when his kicks were errant, and I was cringing and really feeling a bit sorry for him because he's got so much talent and the ability to really sort of, make a real mark at the Swans. I don't know what his personal situation is. I'm pretty sure that, with anybody and with any player, you can go up and down. He's perhaps lacking some form, which is why he was dropped, and then they brought him back again because, presumably because Lewis Melican was injured. I really want to see Nick Newman succeed. I am a little bit disturbed to hear that there are some rumours around his future at the Swans. So I don't think we need to go into that too much at this stage, other than to say that, look, he'd look back at the tapes and cringe, I think, a little bit at a couple of the things that he saw himself do. But, Nick, if, God forbid, you're listening, stick with it, keep trying and keep coming because, I think people believe in you at the Swans and they really, really want you to succeed at the Swans. And I just hope he gets another chance and, can come up with some, just a better game this coming week.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. His first quarter in particular was very poor. He had one particular clanger which pretty much just went straight out the other end for a goal. He was beaten quite a few times in the lead. He didn't really seem to be able to beat his opponent, and he was just in general quite down on his usual, I guess, higher sort of standards. I wonder if it's more of kind of like he's being pushed aside by the Lloyd, the Jones, and the McVeigh kind of combination because there's a little bit too much like for like in that sort of area of the field. So he's a bit surplus to requirements with Lloyd and McVeigh being in the team at the one time. So I guess we talked about this last week on the podcast as well, that potentially he's being not quite pushed aside or pushed out, but he's being, I guess, forced out because those other players they're not going to be dropped for him. He has to find a way to force his way into the team. He may end up going back to the NEFL for a couple more weeks, and I agree with you that he just looks to be short on form, certainly, and confidence. I guess, like the rest of the team, they were a bit flat in that first half, and as Florent said after the match, Longmire gave them a pretty big rev up at halftime. They came out and they were breathing fire and they got stuck in. They were physically right. They were right up there. They were hitting in hard and they made sure the Dogs knew about it. So they turned a pretty dreadful first half into a pretty good second half. And I thought Newman was a lot better in that second half as well. Yep,
totally agree. And good on John Longmire for telling them to fire up because honestly, the Swans were quite meek in some of those exchanges in the first half, and the Bulldogs were, quite motivated and quite on song. So sometimes the only way you can get yourself back into the game is to actually start breathing a bit of fire and having a dig. So it was a really good outcome, the win from that match. I think most Swans supporters would have been expecting a win.
Yep.
It's obviously never that simple. And it doesn't take much of a sort of a variation either way for you to lose your way in this situation. But I certainly was very, very buoyed by what I saw over that over the course of that match. And I think that from a confidence perspective, that will really give the Swans a lot to go on when they line up against Adelaide on Friday night.
I think maybe the margin was reflective of potentially a little bit of, maybe arrogance, a little bit of, they've got a lot of players out. They're not in great form. We can just pretty much rock up and win. So that first half kind of was a bit reflective of that, I think. And on just one more player I wanted to sort of talk about from the Swans side of things was Dean Towers. I thought he had one of his best games for the Swans. I thought certainly in the third quarter he was absolutely immense, especially pinch hitting in a ruck. He was providing a really good lead-up target as well coming out of defence. And in that fourth quarter he kicked a crucial goal from a great pass from McVeigh. And then coming out of defence after it was Dunkley who dropped the mark. He was the target, I think. He was the target who Hanbury chiselled it to. So I thought he has had a pretty good season, and on Saturday afternoon I thought he was absolutely terrific.
Yeah, I agree with you with that. And look, I think we've all been there where we thought, is Dean Towers really going to be at that level where he can keep his spot in the top team each week? We've had those doubts, but look, he's been good this season, and he has been, I think that being able to give him that opportunity to do some pinch hitting in the ruck has actually been a massive benefit for him, because the boy's got springs in his heels. He can.
Oh, he really does.
I mean, look, he may not be able to keep up with Nick Naitanui over the course of a match, but
there's no one really who can.
But very few can. But by the same token, he has made a really worthwhile contribution in that area of the ground, and he's just so determined. He will do anything and try anything. He's himself a reliable kick for goal, and you just don't see him give up. And as somebody who champions a bit of the underdog, I say, go, you good thing.
Yeah. I've been a bit of a fan of his. I know people have been very critical of him over the journey, and at times it was certainly potentially warranted. He wasn't looking like a particularly good footballer at one point, but I thought, his season so far has been really good. He's been a very strong contributor. Now, from that match, from a social perspective, Heather, now you know where this is going.
I do know where this is going. I feel that cracks are starting to develop in the quality of this podcast, Justin.
So certainly, as far as the defence goes, now I'm not going to discuss about the picture or anything because everyone's seen it. Caption this. So if you haven't had a go at captioning it, make sure you caption it. It's reached so far. I don't know if you would believe this, Heather, but it's hit more than 100,000 people.
You know what? I do believe that because people love a good bottom joke, don't they? They just really do. And you better
some good old-fashioned toilet humour.
You better explain to the listeners who may or may not have caught this epic moment.
Yeah.
What exactly happened to Dean Towers?
So late in the third quarter, he took a mark on the wing, and then he played on in front of Lockie Hunter, and Lockie Hunter dived after him and grabbed his shorts to tackle him, and instead of tackling him, he pretty much dacked him and dragged him down to the ground. So he had his bare butt all over national TV. So it's a pretty funny sight if you want to have a look. That's also up on the Facebook page as well and on Twitter. So we've got that all across social media, and it's been a bit of a laugh so far. But look, let's continue on and look at the weekend of football that was, Heather. So the first game that I wanted to talk about was Essendon and Port Adelaide. So Port Adelaide went into that clash. They had 4 wins in a row. They were looking like this is going to be win number 5, and they were clear ahead at the top of the table, and no one looked like they were going to beat them. In the end, Essendon went, you know what, let's actually play defence and forwards in the forward line. So they switched hooker to defence, they put Stringer in the forward line, and they actually won the match. And Port Adelaide were dreadful. Yeah,
well, look, I didn't have the benefit of watching the whole match. I did see some highlights where I saw Jake Stringer kick some lovely goals, and I did actually wonder why that they'd been, I don't like to question John Worsfold's decisions too much because he's a very good coach and I have a lot of respect for him. But I do think that Jake Stringer currently belongs in the forward line, not in the midfield. And certainly by his performance on the weekend, you'd have to say that confirms it.
Yeah, absolutely. he kicked a bag of goals. Essendon looked much more threatening going forward, and they certainly looked a lot better than they did against the Bulldogs last week. Now, another one was I believe it was the Friday night match between Adelaide and Collingwood. Heather, did you actually catch this match?
Yeah, I watched this one from start to finish. Well, let's just say I did have to actually go to bed about 10 minutes before the end, because by that stage, Adelaide were so far behind, it was clear they were never going to win that match, and they didn't. I was quite surprised, and this is, if we leave aside the conditions, which were wet.
Yeah, they were pretty bad at times.
Wet and terrible, and they were for both teams. Let's leave that aside. I was very surprised to see Adelaide play so poorly in front of a home ground and on their home deck, where they've had a very, very good record. I will acknowledge straight away that neither of the Crouch brothers were playing due to injury, and this was obviously bad news for them, because they were absolutely monstered in the stoppage clearances.
Yeah, they were.
Monstered in the stoppage clearances. I think my little notes here say 19-44 in favour of Collingwood, and really that's something that they wouldn't have experienced for a couple of seasons now. And Rory Sloane, who's currently their engine in that regard, was rendered completely ineffective from the attentions of, among others, Steele Sidebottom, who went crazy and had 40-plus possessions and really was best on ground as far as I was concerned.
Yep.
And just look, in general, I'd just like to say that Collingwood were very impressive, and Adelaide was surprisingly poor, given that they were an early sort of pre-season kind of flag favourite. And what did you think?
Oh, look, I thought Collingwood were superb. They were on it from the first minute. They never let up. They were relentless. And it was a dog dirty night for the Crows, and it got a lot worse when Betts hobbled off the field with a hamstring injury. So, look, I love the guy. I think he's a terrific player and a terrific person. Heather, what do you think about him running off? Oh,
look, I love Eddie Betts. He's one of the reasons why people pay their money and turn up to watch. And I think it was very disappointing to see him go off. I can't see him playing against the Swans this weekend, what with hamstring issue,
No.
whether it be tightness or an actual tiny tear. I just don't think that they'd risk him. And of course, the other one that had a bit of a problem on the night was David McKay with another concussion problem. I think he's had a couple in recent times, so I don't think that they'd risk him either. So really, in concert with sort of both Crouch brothers out, they've got some injury issues.
Yeah, they really do, and certainly Crouch, with the Crouch brothers out, there were questions, I guess, when you're looking back at Port Adelaide, and there is kind of like a parallel here and also West Coast, where it was like, can they win away from home? They're flag track bullies, and then the parallel with Adelaide is, if they don't have the Crouch brothers in their midfield, can they actually win games? And so far, the evidence says not really. They can't really compete as much, because Sloane just gets tagged out of the match too easily. He really is too easy to tag. It's kind of like what Hanbury was back in 2012, 2013, when he had to beat the tag. Teams started tagging him, and he was just tagged out of nearly every single match. So, look, Adelaide, I thought, were, in the end, quite poor throughout the match. Brodie Grundy absolutely dominated the match. He ended up with 40 hit-outs, 12 clearances, and 33 disposals, 23 of them contested. That was one of the best rucking performances I've seen all year, hands down. And the commentators are saying, Jacobs, etc., so forth, but Jacobs, for all money's sake, he got absolutely pantsed in that contest. And look, the other things I want to note is the fact that Sloane and both Walker looked like they might be hampered by some sort of injury, or at least down on fitness as well. So it's an interesting one.
Yep, interesting, all right. And in terms of our the other matches that we saw this weekend, I did get a quick look at the GWS game against Fremantle, and I just did note that GWS were just a higher quality team in general than Fremantle. I think Fremantle will be brave this season, and they'll have their moments and their victories, but I just think that GWS just have more quality overall. And unless you had anything further to add on that one, Justin, I'm wondering what you thought about Hawthorn's really rather substantial victory over Melbourne on Sunday.
Melbourne were poor. They were very, very poor. Melbourne certainly, a lot of pundits have favoured them to make the finals, or at least even the top six. So they've got a lot of backers, they've got a lot of support. I think they've just shot themselves in the foot with that performance. They were pretty competitive for about the first 40, 45 minutes, and then they just went home. You could have just put out some cones, and I think that would have been more of a challenge because they kicked one goal after quarter time. Oh, and they were goalless between the second and third quarter.
Yeah, it was actually quite interesting to watch, just from the perspective of it was like Melbourne started very well, and you thought, oh, this is sort of, gee, Hawthorn are going to have to respond here, and then they did respond, but then there was no countering response. You actually wondered whether the Melbourne players had packed up and gone for a pie early, because really, absolutely nothing happened. And I don't think that Hawthorn were doing anything special. They were just doing the usual. But,
yeah.
But Melbourne went missing in action, and if I was the coach of the Demons, if I was Simon Goodwin, I'd be really disappointed, because he's been championing the cause of those players with good reason. But really, it was a really poor second half, in particular from that team, and they would be in some sort of recovery mode, I would have thought, this week, trying to get ready for next weekend.
Yeah, they've got a lot to think about, especially considering the fact that after quarter time they only kicked one goal. So, as bad as Brisbane were, that's pretty much nearly as bad as Brisbane were. That's how bad Melbourne were. So, look, they've got the fact that they kicked, I think, 5 goals in the first quarter to thank for that. Now, and I find that really disappointing, because I don't mind Melbourne. I want them to be successful, and I certainly like watching them when they play, because they're a decent football team, but they've been so down for so long. I think that malaise just sets in whenever anything gets against them. The back's up against the wall, the pressure's on, they just sort of fall to pieces. But another game that I wanted to just really quickly touch on was the North Melbourne Carlton game over in Hobart at Blundstone Arena. Carlton had some injury issues before the match, with Mark Murphy ruled out when he had a plantar fascia issue. So he's had this injury. It's a recurrence, and they just ruled him out before the match. And then they just served up dross. The worst kind of football you can imagine. You might as well just send out some local under-16s team, and I think they probably would have had more of an impact than Carlton did. Did you by any chance catch any of this match?
No, I wasn't able to catch any of this match, but look, that didn't really come as a major surprise to me, the fact that Carlton just rolled out some dross, as you put it. It was more the fact that it was actually and I understand that North Melbourne do play a fair number of their games now, obviously, down at Blundstone Arena, and they've had some significant success, but North Melbourne themselves are no great shakes, in my opinion. So the fact that they rolled over Carlton quite so easily was a bit of an eye-opener, and I just think that poor old Mark Murphy would have been probably sitting at home having a look at that and, pouring a cup of tea and thinking, I've got a bit ahead of me, because, it's put a fair bit of pressure, I would have thought, on the Carlton coach, Bolton.
Yeah, and that's something we also talked about last week, was whether or not Brendan Bolton should be under pressure. It's his third season at the club, and the previous 2 seasons, I think they've had 7 and 5 or 6 wins. So they've been reasonably successful as a club, and they've certainly beat Sydney last year in round 6 in that terrible, terrible game. It's just, I agree. It should be looking at Bolton, and the questions really need to be asked, because the first 4 games from Carlton, except for the first one, which was quite good, have been anywhere from poor to just garbage. So they're free-falling. They are not looking like they're improving at all. Well,
in actual fact, they can't fall any further because they're on the bottom of the ladder.
Oh, they can certainly fall further than the bottom.
Dear.
I don't know how their reputation is at the moment, but look, they are not looking good at all. But anyway, let's move on to the next topic. We are looking at the preview of the Swans and Adelaide match. So, as we touched on before, Heather, the Crows have some significant issues with their injury list at the moment. Some of their best players are out. But the Swans themselves, they aren't injury-free. Rowan is no certainty to return. Reed's out until the bye at least. And a couple of players will certainly have question marks over them. And we're talking about Aaliyah, Newman, and potentially like players like a Marsh or a Fox or a Ronke could come into the side as well.
Yep, it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. I actually, well, even despite his poor game, I have a feeling that Newman may be retained. I'm wondering what you think about whether Aaliyah will continue to play forward. He was a little bit, out of his depth, I suppose, this week. But it would appear that Adelaide do have a fairly tall lineup, and I would think that Aaliyah would probably be retained. Obviously, I wasn't on your podcast last week, but if I could just express my extreme disappointment having sat there, and it happened right in front of us where Reid pulled up and he clutched at his upper leg and immediately sort of started signalling towards the trainers, and we just absolutely,
oh no,
put our hands on our heads and said, oh no, because the Swans definitely look better and look different and better with Reid providing a marking target in their forward line. And I think that
unquestionably,
I think there's going to be some tough times ahead without Reid. I believe he had surgery today on that thigh issue. I think there's a tendon there that needed a bit of mending. He's going to be out for, they're saying, between 8 and 10 weeks. And look, I do think that Adelaide are going to be quite embarrassed about what they turned on, so to speak, on Friday night last week, and I think they're going to be a much more determined and committed outfit this week, which won't help the Swans. And in particular, I'd like to mention the fact that, I know we're talking about the Swans, but let's talk about Taylor Walker, because he put in a pretty subpar performance against Collingwood. And when I say subpar, I mean actually pretty damn bad. He has been criticised by a number of leading commentators, including people like Gary Lyon, about his leadership, and by Jonathan Brown, by his actual captaincy and leadership, having won some awards in recent seasons for that facet of his game.
Well, a lot of players always give him, or say that he's basically the best captain out there, and he's always regarded as one of, if not the best captain in the league. I think it's the AFL players team, the one that they selected last year. I think the last year or two, Tex Walker's actually been the captain of that team as well.
Yeah, 100%. But what has been sort of identified is that in some of the big matches, and I'm thinking about the grand final here, and I'm talking about this match on Friday night, when the chips were down, Tex just wasn't able to bring it or show it or deliver it in any way, shape or form. And this is disappointing because, I mean, the man is a charismatic figure and he has prodigious talent. He is a wonderful kick for goal and he's really done a lot for the Adelaide Crows. But now unfortunately, he has a few critics and I think he's got a fair bit to prove. Well, it'll be interesting to see whether he proves it on Friday night. But, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I watched him on Friday, and he just looked like he wasn't even at the game. He wasn't at the races at all. The Collingwood defence had him well held. It took a pretty significant rev up for him to get back into the game, and by then the game was already well and truly lost at that point. And they just were pretty meek in that last quarter and just sort of rolled aside as Collingwood just ran away with the win. He is a very, very good, talented player. I've always questioned him as a leader because I, to be honest, I haven't really seen it, but you'd never really see much of what happens inside of a club. You see almost all of what happens outside of a club. And it's going to be another really good battle between him and Rampy. So, because Rampy's always matched up on him, he's always played reasonably well on him, and Tex Walker rarely gets off the chain against Rampy. As far as Aaliyah goes, I think he's definitely going to be inside. They're going to need that tall presence in the forward line and certainly in defence to swing back again. Now, Heather, do you think Rowan might play this week?
I think he might. I think he'll be keen to get back and play because he's now missed a couple of games, interstate games, following... Well, I think everybody knows that he and his wife, Amy, were expecting twins. One of those twins suffered from a very serious illness condition called anencephaly. And unfortunately, as a result of that condition, one of his newborn twins has died. His wife gave birth this week. That was the reason why Gary Rowan missed the game, and there was a massive sort of outpouring of support for Gary Rowan and his wife in the lead up to the game against the Bulldogs, and it was really heartening to see the team and the club really sort of got around him. They all wore armbands. They wore a black armband for the baby who died, and they wore a white armband for the baby who was born very healthily. So that was in itself wonderful to see. I would think that Gary, I don't know him personally, but I suspect that he'll be very keen to get back out and have a go. It's whether he's in the right headspace, and really only the coaches and the medical staff and the other staff at the club will be able to determine that.
And as Longmire said, there is no place better to be than in the AFL community, because everyone just comes together in a case like this when someone has loss or, you know, some extreme sort of distress or something like that. So it has been really good to see that in general, just from the larger AFL community. As for whether he plays or not, part of me says love to see him play. The other part of me says probably doesn't need to play, because I think he has something maybe a little bit more important to deal with than playing football. But you never know. It could be one of those instances where it becomes a bit of an emotional release or a mental release for him to be able to do that. They are a terrific young family, and it's tragic that they had to go through that. No one ever really wants to go through that, but I wish them all the best.
And hope that Gary is and Amy, I'm sure they'll make wonderful parents. Wonderful parents. They seemed, everything that I've seen on social media, they've just got a bit of a smile on their face and a very, very good attitude. So long may it continue.
Absolutely. Now, as far as Sydney and Adelaide go, the record is actually kind of interesting, Heather. Now, the Adelaide actually leads the head-to-head at the SCG 11-7. But the Swans have won the last two at the SCG since 2012. So that's a pretty long stretch of time. This would make it 6 seasons, and only twice were played at the SCG.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And look, I am in no way, while we've sort of been, I guess, negative about the Adelaide's performance last weekend, and of course we're looking at their injury list, which is significant. I'm not, and I'm certain that the club is not taking Adelaide for granted in any way, shape or form. They've got some quality players there, and we expect to see them performing well. I think it'll be interesting to see what the weather's going to be. That may come into it. I do like the Swans' chances. I think if they're going to improve that record against Adelaide, then Friday night would be the time to do it, because there's no doubt they're a bit weakened. But under no circumstances would they be just marking that as a W in the book.
Yeah, it's going to be a very dangerous game still. As you said earlier, Adelaide, they were very poor against Collingwood, and they are definitely going to come out of that loss. They're going to want to seek a bit of revenge. They're definitely going to want to step up their performance against the Swans this week. So this is definitely a danger game. Even with the Crouch brothers missing, there's still a lot that they have. Douglas, he was down. You'd expect him to return to form. McKay, if he plays, you'd still expect him to return to some level of form. Now, the other thing is that is actually really interesting between a head-to-head is that Sydney have won the last 6 of the 7 matches against Adelaide, and 4 of those wins have been in South Australia. Now, Franklin averages 3.7 goals at the SCG, and he averages 3.2 against Adelaide in the last 5 years, so that's including 2013.
Well, we're just hoping that Lance Franklin continues to fire up. On Friday night.
Absolutely. We definitely need him to fire up, because as far as our forward line goes, we're a little bit short across the board. So some of the matchups that I've taken note of, Heather, is I think Talia is definitely going to get Franklin. Do you think there's any other one, like maybe Callie or anyone else will pick him up?
No, I can't see it. I think that they want an experienced, talented, wily defender on Franklin, and I think that Talia is the man for the job.
Absolutely. As we discussed earlier, Rampy's definitely going to pick up Walker. He's had a pretty good sort of run against him in the past. Another one is Grundy on Jenkins. Grundy has had a pretty good season, whereas Jenkins was a bit flat against Collingwood on the weekend. Do you think that Jenkins will play full forward or more sort of ruck forward?
No, I think more full forward. And look, I actually think Jenkins has been down for the start of the season, and certainly in the matches that I've watched, I don't think he's produced his best. He can bring a lot on the day, but I think that Reg Grundy, my tip is, will do a very good job on him again.
And now another one. I'm not sure if you would agree with this one, but Smith takes Tom Lynch. This could go to Mills as well. Yeah.
Hamstring injury, but I don't think he should be taking anything for granted with that matchup that you've just talked about, because he's a dangerous player. I like him.
Well, they also have Fogarty, who's impressed in the first 4 games as well, and he's only, I think he's 18 years old, and he's a big player as well. So they're going to have him in the forward line, and that's going to be either a Mills or a Smith kind of role there as well. So another one is, as well, Collingwood tagged out Sloan. So do Sydney do the same thing? Should they tag Sloan out of the game?
Actually, if you put somebody maybe like George Hewitt on him, I reckon that wouldn't be a bad idea, to be honest. I know that tagging is not, as popular as what it used to be back in the good old days, but there is still a role for it. And I just think that if I were the Swans and I'd been watching that game, and I'm sure they watched it very closely, they would have seen Sloan respond very, very poorly to the tag, and I think they'd have to pay him some fairly close attention. As to who it is, I'm not 100% sure. I mean, would it be Luke Parker? That'd be a bit of a waste for Luke.
Yep.
Maybe more of a defensive player like Hewitt, maybe
like a Kieran Jack or
maybe
a Hanbury?
Kieran Jack might put a bit of time into him, sort of sacrifice himself to take out Sloan. I just think that because they're a bit short on genuine legs and creativity in the middle of the ground, they've just got to go for the jugular, really.
They do. Another one that came in was their pickup last year, Gibbs. So he's also another midfielder the Swans have to worry about. And I've taken note of this, and I thought that either Heaney could go to Sloan or Gibbs, but I reckon that Heaney will go to Gibbs for this match. What do you think, Heather?
Yep, I'd agree with that. I think that's a really good matchup, and I'm actually, it's one that's sort of quite intriguing, isn't it? You're sort of looking forward to seeing it already, and it's still got a few days to wait.
Yes, it's only Monday. It's got a few days ahead yet. Now, how do you see this match playing out, Heather? Do you see it as a pretty firm Swans victory, or do you think it'll go down to the line again as it did last year?
Look, I think that the Swans can win this, and by a slightly larger margin. I'd like to think that they could win this by sort of 3 to 4 goals. I think they can win it by, given that Adelaide are under the pump a little bit more this year.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think Swans really should sort of control this game from the outset. My only real concern is the fact that we have a pretty unsettled forward line. If we have Rowan come back, I think that helps a lot because it's going to take a bit of pressure off Aaliyah. But if the Swans can work a bit more with Aaliyah over the week and help him develop more into that forward role, I think that's going to be of great benefit to us. Now, Heather, it's time for our good call and bad call from the previous week. So I had Stephen on the show with me last week, and Stephen's 3 predictions were: he had the Swans by 6 goals. That was prediction number 1. Unfortunately, didn't come through. The second one was Buddy not leading goal kicker at the end of the round. In that match.
That's not bad. Not good,
he did kick
but not
3
bad.
goals. Yeah, it's not good, not bad. He did kick 3 goals, but he wasn't the only one to kick 3 goals, so he's kind of like equal leading. This one was Richmond Lions close. That was unfortunately nowhere near it.
Epic fail, that one.
Epic fail. Now, I did get a couple of predictions right, which I'm happy with. This one, obviously, didn't get it right. Franklin has a picnic with 6 or more goals.
Oh, never mind.
Never mind that one, no. I had Callum Sinclair with 80-plus fantasy points, AFL ranking points, whatever you want to call them, and he ended up with 90-odd, so that's a big tick. Ding.
Excellent.
And this one I got wrong. Port Adelaide beat Essendon. Nope.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Ah, dear. Hard to pick that one, though, because, in my tipping, I went for Port Adelaide too, so...
Yeah. Now, Heather, could you please give us your 3 predictions for the week ahead?
Alrighty, 3 predictions. Well, my first prediction is, and let's go with an obvious one here, Lance Franklin to kick 5 or more.
Ooh, nice.
Second prediction, Nick Smith to have a day out with Eddie not on the field. No matter
and how are we going to measure this one?
How are we going to measure this one? Okay, day out. Okay, so his opposing player to not have an influence on the game. So I will leave you to determine how you measure that. And my third prediction is that Tom Papley bobs up with 3 goals.
Nice. I like that one.
I hope that's not too conservative.
No, certainly not conservative at all. Now, my 3 predictions are that I reckon Parker's going to kick 2 goals again. So he got 3 against the Bulldogs in round 4 on Saturday. I think he's going to get another 2. I think he's good to keep kicking some goals.
Yep, I agree.
Now, I'm going to also go... This is kind of... I'm not a betting man, but this is kind of like from the betting sphere. I'm going to go Swans half-time, full-time. So that means that they're going to lead at half-time and full-time.
Wow, okay. That's brave.
Well, you never know. I mean, if they keep doing that dreadful start, they could be down by a few goals at half-time. And the other one, I'd really, really like to wish Brisbane Lions all the best, but I am not confident about them. But I think that Lions could bounce back.
Well, I don't know what you've been taking, what medication you've been taking this week, Justin, but I would say keep on taking it if you're going to come up with predictions like that. It's very creative. Yeah,
it is. Look, in case you guys don't know, I've been actually sick for the last week or so. So, my brain's a bit frazzled when it comes to this prediction part of the show.
No, I like it. You've got to put yourself out there.
Oh, look, I finally got one prediction right, so I was happy with that. Got to get one right eventually.
Oh, dear. That's great.
But, look, Heather, it has been fantastic having you on the show once again. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me, Justin. It's been good fun as usual.
And guys, remember, you can always follow us on social media. We are on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. You can follow us with the tag The Swans Blog. And for next show, if you want to send us any questions or comments, you can send it to us using the hashtag SwansCast. Until next time, go Swans.
Go Swans.